Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, let me begin by thanking the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies and in particular my dear friend and colleague, Professor Klaus Töpfer, as well as the other partners who have come together on the occasion of this Oceans Governance workshop and meeting in Potsdam for continuing to pay attention to this topic and indeed through this workshop hopefully not only revisit the state of play as we know it being today, but to provide direction and guidance as to how we can move forward on these issues. Oceans cover 3/4 of the Earth's surface. 97% of the water resources on our planet are found in the world's oceans. 30% of carbon is captured and stored in the oceans. Marine phytoplankton produces 50% of the oxygen on our planet. These biophysical data alone demonstrate how vital the question of sustainable management and also governance of the oceans is, not only to our economies and societies today, but indeed to our collective future. Add to that the hundreds of millions of people across the planet who depend directly on a healthy and well-functioning marine ecosystem and the oceans, be it through fisheries, be it through tourism, be it through the maritime economy that depends on shipping, and many other aspects of our daily livelihoods that are inextricably linked to the oceans, and you begin to realize how vital this question of oceans management, sustainable use and governance indeed is. We find ourselves in a strange situation where the world is increasingly knowledgeable about the oceans, and this is a phenomenon that really is only a matter of the last few decades, because for much of the 20th century, knowledge about the oceans and particularly what lies below the surface of the oceans was as unknown or as little known in scientific terms, but certainly in terms of common knowledge, as perhaps planets that are somewhere in the galaxy. The analogy that we know less about what we found at the bottom of the oceans than what we may know about the surface of the moon is perhaps no longer as relevant as it was 20, 30 years ago, but certainly we are still very much confronted with both scientific, geographical, and also the ecological dynamics, frontiers of knowledge when it comes to oceans and marine ecosystems. Unfortunately, the statistics of a global footprint of use and abuse, if you want, of marine resources has demonstrated that once again we find ourselves at a point where when we look at the sustainability of this use and also the ecological functioning of marine ecosystems, that most of the indicators are pointing into the wrong direction. Indeed, our collective footprint, be it in terms of marine biodiversity, be it in terms of fisheries, be it in terms of pollution, be it in terms of ocean acidification, are all giving us cause for concern. Our ability to address these phenomena, both on land but also in the way that we manage oceans and marine ecosystems, is far behind where evidence and scientific knowledge today would dictate us to be. In focusing on the issue of oceans governance, I believe that we have, through the partnership between the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, IDRI and UNEP, both with the workshop last year and the work that has happened in the interim, taken an important step to create further momentum for addressing something that many scientists have spoken about, more and more political leaders are aware of, and also international bodies, be it in the United Nations system, be it in the scientific community, or the most recent report of the Global Oceans Commission, have pointed towards a need for accelerated action. At Rio+20 in the future, we want member states of the United Nations also acknowledge that there is a need to address these issues with greater priority. We have some reason for optimism in the context of the currently ongoing negotiations and discussions concerning the development of a set of sustainable development goals. Indeed, oceans have at the moment one of the goals as part of the 17 framework goals that have been proposed for moving forward as governments now enter into the final negotiation phase for these sustainable development goals. This is a good indicator that certainly awareness of the need to put these issues higher up on the agenda and also for the need for collective international and multilateral action is certainly called for. On the other hand, we also have the experience of oceans governance, particularly in the context of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, associated instruments, but also other governance arenas, be it the International Maritime Organization, be it the Convention on Biological Diversity, be it the Regional Seas Conventions and Action Plans, be it the Regional Fisheries Management Organizations, and many other bodies that both at national, regional and global level have tried to address themselves to this lacuna in terms of a collective, coordinated and more effective approach to ocean governance. This is the 40th year that we are celebrating also as an anniversary of the Regional Seas Conventions and action plans that have given us, at least at the regional level, a foothold in trying to bring countries together to address these issues. The balance sheet is both positive and in some respects sobering. Many countries have indeed begun to cooperate at the regional level, and we have seen through a number of the Regional Seas Conventions also action plans really beginning to change decision-making, triggering new actions that focus on the issue of the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity and regional seas. However, in the broader context of our negotiations under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, it is also my impression that we have reached a point that can almost be described as a point of impasse. From an instrument that in many ways was pioneering in both focusing on a public good, a common public good called the oceans and the marine ecosystems, that led initially to the development, drafting, and then ratification by many countries of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, we have found ourselves today increasingly in a point where negotiations about how to further evolve the instruments under UNCLOS, how to address new and emerging science and phenomena of environmental change, of also the degradation of ocean ecosystems, is not really seeing the kind of progress that I think many of us are looking for. Indeed, the question of oceans governance has become a very controversial one. And as so often in multilateral processes, when there is controversy, it usually points to competing interests, conflicting interests, and therefore the need for looking for new avenues and also a new logic in how to address what is now an imperative for action. Unfortunately, these interests are very often linked to sometimes hypothetical, sometimes very real economic interests, linked to territoriality on the one side, but also to the open access regime that still prevails in much of the areas beyond national jurisdiction. Indeed, it was in Rio at the summit Rio+20 that member states set a new milestone and also a timeline, which I think we should take extremely seriously as a litmus test of whether UNCLOS and member states are indeed able to evolve this instrument. By the end of the 69th session of the General Assembly, which is the current session that began this September, member states have committed to try and identify a way forward in terms of an additional instrument under UNCLOS that could address itself to the question of what happens in areas beyond national jurisdiction. The ad hoc, informal, open-ended working group that is currently working on this issue is the principal vehicle that member states have chosen to address themselves to this matter, and it certainly will be, I think, upon all of us to engage with this process as actively as we can in order to not only bring the science but also the experience of what can work, what hasn't worked, and where new territory has to be stepped on. Over 64% of the world's oceans area actually lies in areas beyond national jurisdiction. That statistic in itself demonstrates how vital this question of what happens in these global commons, what happens beyond areas of national jurisdiction, is to an overall framework for oceans governance and ultimately a conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity. It is at this moment in time something that divides nations more than it unites them, and therefore the work that we can do together collectively with IDRI, with the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, with UNEP, but I hope also with a growing number of partners in bringing the best of knowledge and science, but also the best analysis of where opportunities and also imperatives for action lie, is extremely critical. Our work in the last year has focused particularly also on the opportunity to try and see how we can move forward at regional level. Certainly the experience of 40 years of regional seas and action plans has taught us a great deal. And often in trying to address global problems, the only entry point is not a singular global agreement. It may need actions at different tiers and at different levels of where countries are either more able to act collectively, feel more comfortable in putting in a regulatory framework and a governance system that allows us to move forward on some of the issues that I have alluded to earlier on in my remarks. Certainly, I hope that out of the workshop in Potsdam, we will not only get an analysis of the problems and the deficits of what we are confronted with today, but indeed a roadmap and also a clarion call, if you want, for many more partners, be they in the scientific community, in governments, or indeed also in some of the users, be it local communities or be it the business world that very often is a beneficiary, but also a potential loser if we do not move forward on oceans governance and sustainability issues over the coming decade. I would like to extend my particular appreciation to the leadership that Professor Klaus Töpfer has shown with the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies in taking this topic forward, and also hopefully out of this workshop in Potsdam, together with many of our partners and US participants, to agree on an agenda that allows us to work in a coordinated, cohesive and effective formation of particularly reaching out on the one hand to the process under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea that is currently ongoing in the 69th session of the General Assembly, but also to focus on how we can influence the broader work that the Sustainable Development Goals are now being subjected to, and that hopefully by next year provide us with a key anchor in the broader Sustainable Development Agenda for giving ocean management, ocean sustainable use and conservation issues a higher order of importance. From here in Nairobi, I would like to commit the United Nations Environment Programme to continuing to work with you and also to give greater priority to this issue of oceans, of marine ecosystems management, of sustainable development and the oceans agenda, and in particular to our partnership that hopefully will attract a number of other key players to be able to move forward. And by the time that we convene next year in September in New York for the high-level segment of the next General Assembly session, perhaps to celebrate at least a partial breakthrough in what otherwise is becoming a story of increasing concern in terms of the ability of the international community of member states to evolve the ocean governance framework in line with scientific evidence and the imperatives for action. Thank you very much and have a very successful workshop.